Hookah pop quiz. When you think of ancient empires, what comes to mind? Rome, right? Greece? Maybe Egypt with those massive pyramids. But here's something that'll blow your mind. Cyrus was an empire so vast, so powerful, that at its peak, nearly half the people alive on Earth lived under its rule. And yet most of us know almost nothing about it. I'm talking about ancient Persia, the empire that Hollywood turned into villains, that history classes barely mention, but that was once the absolute dominant force on the planet. So why don't we know more about them? And how did they become so ridiculously powerful? Let's dive into one of history's most overlooked superpowers. Mein content I write, so here's the thing. Most of what we know about ancient Persia comes from three Greek blogs: Herodotus, Xenophon, and Statius. Sounds reliable, yeah? Well, not exactly. The Greeks and the Persians were bitter rivals. It's like asking a Manchester United fan to write an unbiased history of Liverpool. You're going to get a skewed version of events, aren't you? These Greek writers didn't understand Persian culture, and honestly, they didn't care to. A lot of what they wrote was either biased, exaggerated, or just plain wrong. Even the names of Persian rulers that we use today are completely off. Cyrus? His actual name was Kurush. Darius? That was Darayafaush. Xerxes, the bloke from that film, was actually called Hoshayarsha. The Greek alphabet didn't even have the right letters for Persian sounds, so they just made do with what they had. And those rulers, they weren't kings in the Greek sense. They were shahs. Completely different concept. Luckily, we've got more than just Greek gossip to go on. The Royal Archive at Persepolis holds thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform script. These aren't propaganda pieces or dramatic battle accounts, they're economic records, tax receipts, trade logs, boring stuff, but absolutely brilliant for understanding how the Persian Empire actually functioned. So who were these Persians anyway? They were originally an Indo-Iranian people, closely related to the Medes. They migrated from regions around modern-day Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan down toward the fertile lands of Mesopotamia at the end of the Bronze Age. They called themselves Aryana, a name that still echoes in the Wardiran today. Interestingly, Pars in their language literally meant warrior or strong man. Fitting, really. These weren't your typical empire builders though. They started as pastoral nomads practicing what's called vertical nomadism. Instead of wandering across vast plains, they moved up and down mountain slopes with the seasons. Summers in the highland valleys, winters in the lower foothills where the grass was lusher. You can still see the style of migration in parts of the Caucasus today. They lived simply, ate modestly, rarely drank alcohol, and they were absolutely brilliant horsemen. Unlike the Mesopotamians, the Persians wore trousers perfect for reading and these distinctive pointed hats called tiaras. They were also taller and lighter skinned than the native peoples of the Fertile Crescent, which made them stand out. In the 2th century BC, the Persians captured the Elamite city of Anshan. From that point on, every Persian king would start their titles with King of Anshan. It was a power move, really. Then, in the 9th century BC, everything changed. Cyrus II came to power, the man who'd eventually be known as Cyrus the Great. At the time, the Persians were still vassals of the Median Empire. But Cyrus wasn't content with that. He led a rebellion against the Median king, Astyages. Several powerful Median clans, fed up with Astyages' rule, switched sides and backed Cyrus. With their support, he smashed the Median army. On the very site of the decisive battle, Cyrus founded the city of Pasargadae, which became the new capital of his growing empire. But Cyrus didn't stop there. He went on an absolute rampage, conquering Parthia, Armenia, Cappadocia, Elam, Lydia, and Ionia. Some regions, like Hyrcania and Cilicia, just surrendered voluntarily. With much of the region under his control, Cyrus set his sights on the big prize, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the dominant superpower of Mesopotamia. According to legend, the Babylonian king Nabonidus had angered the chief god Marduk. Marduk supposedly turned to Cyrus and called on him to come to Babylon, depose Nabonidus, and take his place. Nice story, but here's what actually happened. When the Persian army approached Babylon, the gates were opened without a fight. The city's nobility, completely disillusioned with Nabonidus, just handed the city over to Cyrus. No more dramatic siege, no more bloodshed, just a transfer of power. Now, Here's where Cyrus gets really interesting. He wasn't just a brilliant conqueror, he was a shrewd statesman. He treated conquered peoples with surprising leniency, provided they didn't fight too hard. Rather than ruling with an iron fist, Cyrus relied on local elites. Defeated kings were often spared and even given high-ranking positions within his empire. He generally avoided interfering in local affairs. If you had officials running things before the conquest, they could stay in their posts afterward. This minimized resentment and reduced the likelihood of rebellions. Cyrus also freed peoples who'd been displaced by the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Among them, the Jews. He allowed them to return to their homelands and he even funded the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem. That's why he's remembered with great respect in the Bible. The truth is, Persians made up only a tiny fraction of the empire, roughly 1 in 20 subjects. Cyrus couldn't rely on brute force. He built a system based on tolerance, cooperation, and the local autonomy. Genius, really. After conquering Babylon, Cyrus turned his attention to securing the northern borders from raids by Scythian tribes. But this campaign would be his last. In a fierce battle against the Massagetaf, led by Queen Tomiris, the Persian army was nearly wiped out. Cyrus himself was killed in action. Power passed to his son, Cambyses. Almost immediately, rebellions erupted across the empire. Cambyses spent years re-establishing control. Once order was restored, he launched an invasion of Egypt. He captured Memphis, took the pharaoh prisoner, and he brought both Egypt and Libya under Persian rule. He planned to conquer Carthage and Kush next, but those campaigns failed. The Kushite expedition collapsed due to supply shortages, and the invasion of Carthage was called off when the Phoenicians refused to fight their fellow countrymen. Meanwhile, another revolt broke out in Babylon. Cambyses set out to suppress it but fell ill and died on the journey. Power was supposed to pass to Cambyses' brother, Smerdis, but a man named Darius stepped in. He claimed the person posing as Smerdis was actually an impostor, a magus named Gomata, and that the real Smerdis had been secretly killed by Cambyses long before. Using this accusation, Darius seized the throne. Darius wasn't a descendant of Cyrus, so to legitimize his rule, he declared himself a descendant of Achaemenid, Cyrus' great-grandfather. From that point on, the royal line became known as the Achaemenid dynasty. Like Cambyses, Darius spent much of his early reign crushing revolts. He launched an unsuccessful campaign against the Scythians north of the Black Sea, added thrace to the empire, formed an alliance with Macedonia, and fought against the Greeks, though that's a story for later. Darius is remembered less as a general and more as a great administrator. His legacy lies in the reforms and the organization that transformed the Persian Empire into one of the most advanced states of the ancient world. He divided the empire into provinces called satrapias, each overseen by a governor known as a satrap. Satraps held civilian authority. They managed infrastructure, maintained roads, collected taxes, and oversaw justice. Initially, they also controlled the military, but after several satrap-led uprisings, Darius stripped them of military power and placed armies under direct central command. Darius introduced a standardized currency system. The gold daric was worth 20 silver siglos. Coins themselves were a Persian invention. That credit goes to Lydia, but it was under Darius that the concept of a universal medium of exchange spread widely. A Persian soldier's monthly pay was 1 daric. For context, a sheep cost about 3 siglos, and a sack of flour around 2. Darius also oversaw the construction of an extensive network of paved roads. These allowed for rapid troop movements and boosted overland trade. The most famous route, the Royal Road, connected the Aegean coast in Lydia to Susa, the ancient capital of Elam. Based on this road network, the Persians established an organized postal system. At regular intervals, relay stations were built. Messages could travel from one end of the empire to the other in just a few days, pass swiftly from one rider to the next. Darius also built the first version of the Suez Canal. It didn't connect the Red Sea to the Mediterranean directly, but it linked the Red Sea to one of the Nile Delta's branches. This enabled navigation between the two seas and gave a major boost to maritime trade. Monumental construction flourished during Darius' reign. He made Persepolis, located near Pasargadae, the new ceremonial capital. In total, the empire had 5 major capitals: Pasargadae, Persepolis, Ecbatana, Susa, and Babylon. Under Darius, Persepolis became the grandest city, home to massive projects like the Apadana, a grand audience hall. Just outside the cities, the Persians created lush gardens known in their language as Paradisa, a word that eventually gave you as paradise. The backbone of the Persian army was the immortals, an elite force of professional heavy infantry clad in armor and armed with spears, swords, and bows. This unit always maintained a constant strength of 10 men. Whenever a soldier was killed, retired, or incapacitated, he was immediately replaced. The name immortals may actually be a mistranslation of a Persian word meaning companions, but thanks to Herodotus, the term stuck. The Persian army's light infantry consisted of archers and slingers. They also fielded heavy cavalry armed with spears and light cavalry with javelins. Depending on the region, they deployed auxiliary troops: Egyptians, Babylonians, Syrians, Jews, Greeks, and the others. They also frequently used mercenaries, especially Greeks and the Scythians. Now, Persians are often labeled as fire worshippers. That's not quite accurate. They didn't worship fire itself. Their religion was an early form of Zoroastrianism known as Mazdaism. Unlike modern Zoroastrianism, this version wasn't strictly monotheistic. The Persians didn't deny the existence of other gods, they simply placed their god, Ahura Mazda, above all others. He was the god of gods, just as the Persian king was king of kings. Within Mazdaism, there were other divine figures: Mithra, the god of light and the truth; Ahriman, the spirit of evil; Anahita, the goddess of fertility. This form of belief is called henotheism, recognizing man gods while giving primacy to one. Mazdaism was primarily the religion of the Persian and the some Median elites. The Persians never tried to impose their faith on conquered peoples. The empire was remarkably tolerant of religious diversity. Babylonian Marduk, Jewish Yahweh, Egyptian Amun, Greek Zeus all had a place under Persian rule. The Persians also had a curious tradition for decision-making. According to their beliefs, a person under the influence of alcohol could only speak the truth. So when facing an important decision, they'd first discuss it while drunk. The next day, they'd reconsider the idea sober. If it still seemed good, it was approved. If not, the whole process started again. Brilliant, really. The Greco-Persian Wars began with a rebellion of the Greek colonies in Ionia in 499 BC. The Ionian Greeks rose up against Persian rule, supported by Athens and the other Aegean Greeks. They even launched a raid on Sardis, the capital of the Lydian satrapy, burning the city and destroying the temple of Anahita. The rebellion lasted 7 years before it was crushed. In its aftermath, Persia sent envoys to Greek city-states, requesting earth and the water as symbolic gesture of submission. Polis accepted, but the two most powerful, Athens and Sparta, refused. In Sparta, the envoys were thrown into a well and told to find the earth and the water, sir. In Athens, they were put on trial and executed. This enraged the Persians, who began preparing a punitive expedition. The Persian army landed at the coastal plain near Merasan, intending to march inland and destroy Athens. But the Athenians had learned of the invasion and marched to intercept them. Despite outnumbering the Greeks by more than 2 to 1, the Persians found themselves in a disadvantageous position. The Merasan plain sloped upward, and the Greeks were positioned at the higher end. Any Persian attack would have to be launched uphill. The Persian commander, Artaphornes, hesitated, but the Greek general, Miltiades, was waiting for Spartan reinforcements. Eventually, Artaphornes had an idea: if the Athenian army was at Merasan, the city itself must be unprotected. He ordered a withdrawal to the ships, planning to sail around and strike Athens. At that moment, Miltiades attacked. The Persians, caught off guard while reorganizing, were thrown into chaos. The Greek assault shattered their lines. About 7,000 elite troops and dozens of ships were lost. Greek casualties, around 150 men. Despite the defeat, Darius didn't abandon his plans for revenge, but he never got the chance. A revolt in Egypt diverted his attention, and not long after, he died. Darius' successor, Xerxes, assembled a massive army and marched toward Greece island. Greek historians claimed his forces numbered 1,000,000 men, though that's clearly exaggerated. Modern estimates suggest closer to 200,000, still an enormous force. the Greeks decided to make their stand at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, which at the time was only a few dozen meters wide. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't just the famous 300 Spartans who defended the pass. Several thousand soldiers from other Greek city-states also took part. The battle was lost. The Greeks held off the Persians for 2 days. On the third, most withdrew, fearing encirclement. Only the Spartan contingent and a handful of others chose to stay, no more than 500 men. Against such overwhelming numbers, they couldn't hold. By day's end, they were surrounded and killed to the last. After this, the Persians advanced unopposed and reached Athens, only to find the city empty. The women and the children had been evacuated, while the men had taken to the city to confront the Persian navy. The two fleets met near the island of Salamis. The Persians had the numerical advantage, but their ships were smaller and lighter. The Greek fleet, composed mainly of heavy triremes, lured the Persians into the narrow strait. Once inside, the Persians lost their key advantage, maneuverability. The heavier Greek triremes struck with full force. The Persian fleet was devastated, losing around a third of its ships. With their navy shattered, the Persian army lost its primary supply line. The Persians burned Athens but soon began a retreat toward the Hellespont. That retreat quickly turned into a chaotic rout. Several more battles followed, most ending in Greek victories. Eventually, the Persians were forced to agree to peace, giving up control of all the Aegean islands and the coast of Asia Minor. Though defeated on the battlefield, the Persians didn't abandon their goal of influencing the Greeks. They simply changed tactics, turning to cultural influence and bribery. Prominent Greek figures accepted Persian gold in exchange for promoting certain ideas or policies. But disaster for Persia came not from Greece, but from an unexpected direction. In the 40th century BC, King Philip II of Macedon united Greece and he began preparing for an invasion of Persia. But suddenly, he was dead stabbed by his own bodyguard, Pausanias. The true motive remains a mystery. Power passed to Philip's 18-year-old son, Alexander. Alexander inherited a fully assembled invasion force and he wasted no more time fulfilling his father's plan. Over the next 13 years, he swept through the Achaemenid Empire like a storm, never suffering a single defeat. The Persians had no more answer to the Macedonian phalanx or to Alexander's extraordinary tactical genius and the uncanny luck. By 329 BC, after more than 2 centuries, the Achaemenid Empire had ceased to exist. The Hellenistic age had begun, closing, but here's the thing. Persia's legacy didn't vanish. It lived on and evolved first within the Hellenistic Seleucid Empire, then in the Parthian kingdom, later under the Sasanian dynasty, and beyond. Even today, the Persian language survives, and despite the dominance of Islamic rule in modern Iran, there are still communities that preserve the ancient Persian faith, Zoroastrianism. So the next time someone mentions ancient empires and he only brings up Rome or Greece, remind them. There was an empire that ruled half the world, built roads and postal systems that would make modern governments jealous, and he created a system of tolerance and governance that was centuries ahead of its time. That empire was Persia, and it deserves to be remembered. If you enjoyed diving into this forgotten superpower, smash that like button and hit subscribe for more history that doesn't get taught in school. Seriously, there's so much more to uncover. Cheers for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.